There's a woman out there who walks into rooms and feels the silence before the noise. She doesn't have a circle, she doesn't have a tribe, she doesn't have a sisterhood to lean on, and yet she's still standing. Her life doesn't look like the highlight reels we scroll past on social media. There are no birthday dinners with matching outfits, no girls' trips with photo dumps, no late-night phone calls to catch up on gossip. She has something different: silence. And in that silence there is both pain and power. Because while the world celebrates community, she has been forced into solitude. But solitude is not always punishment. Sometimes solitude is preparation. Sometimes God strips away the noise so that you can hear him more clearly, so that you can discover who you are without the voices of others shaping your identity. A woman with no friend is not a woman with no value. She is not a woman left behind. She is a woman being refined. And if you've ever found yourself in that position where you felt the sting of loneliness but still had to show up, still had to function, still had to press through life, you know the untold strength it takes. There's a testimony in being overlooked. There's a story in being misunderstood. And there's a hidden lesson in walking alone that crowds will never understand. See, when you have no friends to validate you, you have to learn how to validate yourself. When no one is clapping for you, you've got to learn how to clap for yourself. When there's no one to call, no one to lean on, no one to vent to, you start to develop a different kind of relationship with God. You stop talking about him as a distant figure and start talking to him as your confidant, your counselor, your friend who sticks closer than a brother. That intimacy isn't learned in the crowd, it's learned in the quiet. The beauty of this story is that it challenges what society tells us. We are told that our worth is measured by our circle, that the more people you have around you, the more valuable you must be. But what if your power was never meant to be measured by how many people stand beside you, but by how well you can stand when no one else does? What if the absence of friends isn't rejection, but redirection? What if God is keeping you hidden, not because you're unworthy, but because he's preparing you for something that requires a foundation built in him alone? This sermon is not just about loneliness, it's about transformation. It's about how the absence of people in your life can push you into the presence of God. It's about how strength is developed in solitude, how resilience is built in silence, and how purpose is birthed when you're forced to walk without applause. There, quote, "as a strength that solitude births that cannot be manufactured in the crowd." When you walk alone, every step feels heavier because there's no one to share the load. Yet in carrying what feels unbearable, something begins to shift inside of you. You realize that your back is stronger than you thought, your feet are sturdier than you imagined, and your heart has a greater capacity than you ever gave it credit for. That's the hidden gift of solitude. It doesn't just show you who left, it reveals what you carry. When a woman has no friends, she learns quickly that strength is not optional, it's essential. She becomes her own motivator, her own accountability partner, her own encourager. And while at first this feels like punishment, over time it becomes empowerment. Because the same woman who once wept over being overlooked becomes the woman who no longer depends on the applause of others to validate her worth. She discovers that resilience is not found in the noise of company, but in the silence of determination. Walking alone forces you to confront your identity without filters. Friends can sometimes become mirrors, reflecting back to you not who you are, but who they want you to be. But when you are stripped of that, you are forced to stand face to face with your raw, unfiltered self. And it is in that confrontation that resilience is formed. You stop shrinking to fit someone else's expectations and start stretching into the fullness of who God created you to be. Think about it. Some of the greatest figures in history had to walk alone before they walked into destiny. Joseph was thrown into a pit by his brothers. David was tending sheep in isolation long before he faced Goliath. Jesus himself often withdrew from the crowd to be alone in prayer. Their solitude was not a sign of weakness. It was a breeding ground for strength. It was in those hidden places that they discovered identity, cultivated faith, and developed resilience that no enemy could take away. For a woman with no friend, the nights can feel long and the silence can feel deafening. But in those very moments, a different kind of muscle is being exercised. It's the muscle of persistence, the muscle of focus, the muscle of unshakable faith. You learn how to keep going, not because someone else told you to, but because you decided within yourself that quitting is not an option. That decision becomes the foundation of your resilience. Resilience is not about never breaking down. It's about breaking and still choosing to rise. It's about crying in secret, but showing up in strength. It's about being wounded, but refusing to stay down. And solitude gives you the space to cultivate that kind of strength because no one else is there to hold you up. You learn how to hold yourself up. And when you've mastered standing alone, you become unmovable even when others finally show up. What solitude does is teach you how to rely on what's inside rather than what's around. The crowd may not be there, the friends may not call, the invitations may not come, but you've discovered something deeper, a reservoir of resilience, a reservoir of strength, a reservoir of identity that is not tied to the presence or absence of people. And once you discover that, you realize that solitude was never meant to break you, it was meant to build you. Loneliness is one of the most misunderstood seasons of life. Most people see it as a curse, as punishment, as something to escape as quickly as possible. But what if loneliness is not the enemy? It's the classroom. What if the silence you hate is the very place where God is speaking the loudest? Because there are lessons you can only learn when the voices of others are silenced. There are truths that only come when the crowd is gone and it's just you and God. When you're surrounded by people, even the well-intentioned ones, their voices become loud in your decisions. Their opinions start to shape your perspective. You find yourself wondering, what will they think? Will they approve? Will they accept me? But when God walks you into a season of loneliness, those questions lose their power. Suddenly you're left with nothing but your own thoughts and His Word. It's in that place that He begins to strip away the layers of insecurity, people-pleasing, and false identity you've picked up along the way. Loneliness forces reflection. It brings you face to face with wounds you've been too busy to notice, with dreams you've been too distracted to pursue, and with patterns you've been too comfortable to confront. It's like God saying, daughter, before I surround you with people again, I need you to sit with yourself. I need you to recognize your own voice. I need you to heal what's been broken, confront what's been buried, and embrace what's been overlooked. That is the curriculum of loneliness, healing, self-discovery, and spiritual depth. Some of the most profound revelations happen when no one else is around. Think about Moses. Before he ever led Israel out of Egypt, he was in the wilderness by himself. That solitude became the classroom where God revealed purpose. Elijah found himself under a tree, depressed and alone, and it was there that God whispered, not in the wind, not in the earthquake, not in the fire, but in the still small voice. Jesus himself spent 40 days in the wilderness alone before stepping into his ministry. Each of these moments shows us that isolation is not rejection, it's instruction. The thing about a classroom is that it's not always comfortable. Lessons challenge you, they stretch you, they pull you out of your comfort zone. Loneliness does the same. It teaches you patience when you want companionship. It teaches you trust when you can't see the outcome. It teaches you how to find joy in God's presence instead of needing validation from human presence. And while it feels uncomfortable, that discomfort is producing something eternal. For a woman with no friend, the temptation is to think something is wrong with her. To wonder if she's unworthy of love, if she's somehow broken, if she's missing what everyone else seems to have. But the reality is this: God often teaches His most valuable lessons in hidden places. He teaches you how to hear His whisper when the crowd is gone. He teaches you how to walk by faith and not by sight. He teaches you how to love yourself enough to stop begging for seats at tables He never built for you. And in that classroom of loneliness, your confidence shifts. You stop basing your value on who comes and who goes. You stop chasing approval like it's oxygen. You learn how to breathe in God's presence and realize it is enough. You discover that being alone doesn't mean you are abandoned. It means you are being refined. That season of isolation isn't just about what you lose. It's about what you gain. You gain wisdom. You gain clarity. You gain an unshakable connection with the one who knows you best. Loneliness as a classroom means that every tear, every quiet night, every unanswered call, every empty chair at the table, it's all part of the lesson plan. And while it may not feel like it in the moment, those lessons are equipping you with strength, perspective, and identity that no one can take away. There's a powerful difference between being rejected by people and being protected by God. At first glance, both experiences feel the same. You're left out, overlooked, excluded. You see others forming bonds, building circles, creating memories, and you wonder why your name wasn't on the list, why your presence wasn't desired, why the door was closed in your face. It hurts, and in that sting of rejection, the enemy whispers that you're unworthy, unwanted, unlovable. But the truth is, not every closed door is rejection. Some are divine protection. When people reject you, it's easy to take it personally. We start to dissect ourselves. Maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe I said the wrong thing. Maybe I don't have what they're looking for. But what if God allowed their rejection not because you were lacking, but because He was protecting? What if He kept you from that group because their influence would have pulled you off course? What if He knew that your heart was too valuable to be mishandled in that season? What if the very thing you thought you lost was actually God's way of saving you? Protection often disguises itself as rejection. Think about relationships you cried over that didn't work out, only to look back years later and thank God they didn't. Think about jobs, friendships, or opportunities you thought you needed, but when the door slammed shut, it forced you into a path that aligned more with your destiny. God sees beyond what we can see. Where we see rejection, He sees danger. Where we feel pain, He's orchestrating preservation. Take Joseph, for example. Rejected by his brothers, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery. On the surface, it looked like rejection, but every step of that painful journey was protection leading him toward the palace. David wasn't even considered when Samuel came to anoint the next king. His own father overlooked him. That looked like rejection, but it was protection because God was saving His anointing for the right time. Even Jesus, He was despised, rejected, betrayed by His own. But every no from man was making room for the ultimate yes from heaven. For a woman with no friend, it's easy to internalize rejection as deficiency. But God's protection means He is setting boundaries around your life that others can't always see. He's keeping you from counterfeit friendships that would drain you. He's shielding you from circles that would dilute your purpose. He's covering you from connections that look appealing but carry hidden agendas. Sometimes loneliness is simply God's hand of protection, keeping you safe from what you don't even know could harm you. We have to shift our perspective. Instead of saying they rejected me, start saying God protected me. Instead of asking why don't they like me, start asking, Lord, what are you shielding me from? That shift turns rejection into revelation. It transforms pain into gratitude. It reminds you that your story is not defined by who walked away, but by who stayed, and God has never left. The difference between rejection and protection is the difference between people's perspective and God's plan. People see the surface. God sees the future. People act from their flesh. God moves from eternity. People might reject you based on their limitations, insecurities, or lack of understanding, but God protects you based on His knowledge of your destiny. So while you're crying over who didn't call back, heaven is rejoicing because your spirit was spared. Rejection stings, but protection saves. And when you finally learn to see the two differently, your heart begins to heal. You stop begging for entry into spaces that don't deserve you. You stop mourning over people who were never assigned to your journey. You start to trust that every no was really God's yes to your safety, your growth, and your purpose. What once looked like abandonment now looks like divine alignment. And suddenly you realize that rejection was never the end. It was always God's way of guarding what He values most, you. There are seasons in life that look like loss but are really alignment. When a woman finds herself with no friends, no circle, no one to lean on, it can feel like life has betrayed her. She starts to wonder, why me? Why do I have to walk alone while others are surrounded? But often what looks like a season of lack is actually God's way of pulling everything into divine order. Loneliness isn't always punishment, sometimes it's positioning. Divine alignment means that God is rearranging your life to match His plan. And alignment doesn't always feel good. It's uncomfortable. It looks like pruning. It looks like separation. It looks like unanswered calls, people drifting away, invitations that stop coming. But what if those very shifts are not accidents? What if they are the fingerprints of God carefully placing you where you belong? When God is aligning you, He begins to remove what doesn't fit. Think about a chiropractor adjusting a spine. The popping, the shifting, it doesn't feel pleasant in the moment, but afterward there's relief, there's healing, there's restoration of movement. That's what God does in divine alignment. He takes the crooked places in your life and straightens them out. And sometimes the straightening requires subtraction before it brings addition. Look at Abraham. God told him to leave his country, his family, and everything familiar. Why? Because divine alignment required separation. God could not bring Abraham into the promise as long as he was still tied to the place that represented comfort and limitation. Sometimes your no friends season is God saying, I need you to move. I need you to leave behind the familiar so I can take you into the promise. Divine alignment also means timing. God will not allow you to be surrounded by people who are out of sync with your season. Maybe you used to have a circle, but they could only walk with you as far as the last season allowed. When God shifted your season, they could no longer go where you're headed. That's not betrayal, it's transition. They were good for who you were, but they cannot carry who you're becoming. A woman with no friend may feel forgotten, but she is actually being preserved. God is protecting her from premature exposure. He's shielding her from distractions that would detour her destiny. He's teaching her to rely on His voice so that when He does align her with the right people, she won't lose herself in the noise. Divine alignment ensures that when the right friendships, partnerships, or opportunities arrive, she has the maturity and clarity to recognize them. The danger of misalignment is that it drains you. Wrong friendships will keep you busy but empty. Wrong relationships will keep you connected but confused. Wrong alignments will make you feel surrounded but still lonely. That's why God will sometimes strip it all away. He would rather you feel temporarily isolated than permanently misplaced. He would rather you sit alone in His will than be celebrated outside of it. When you begin to see your no friends season as divine alignment, your perspective changes. Instead of mourning who left, you begin to prepare for who's coming. Instead of questioning your worth, you begin to recognize your value. You start to understand that this isolation is not a reflection of rejection, but an indication of direction. God is leading you somewhere. He is fine-tuning your path. He is creating room for what is worthy of your purpose. Alignment doesn't just protect your future, it defines it. Because when you are aligned with God, you cannot be derailed by man. What He removes, He replaces. What He shifts, He secures. What He blocks, He blesses. So the next time you find yourself in a season of solitude, remind yourself, this is not chaos, it's choreography. God is aligning every piece, every step, every relationship to fit perfectly into His plan for your life. One of the most powerful lessons a woman with no friend learns is the importance of cultivating self-validation and divine validation over external applause. We live in a culture that feeds off likes, comments, claps, and affirmations. Validation has become the currency of worth, and without it, many feel invisible. But when you find yourself in a season with no one around to clap for you, you are faced with the life-changing opportunity to discover how to clap for yourself, and even more, to receive validation from God, the only voice that truly matters. External applause feels good, but it's fleeting. People can celebrate you today and forget you tomorrow. They can crown you in one season and crucify you in the next. If your identity is built on the sound of their claps, then your confidence will always rise and fall with their opinions. But when you're walking alone, when no one notices your progress, when no one is there to affirm your worth, you have to reach for a different source. You have to learn how to build yourself up with words of faith, with declarations of truth, with the quiet conviction that you are valuable even if no one else sees it. Self-validation doesn't mean arrogance. It doesn't mean you don't need people. It means you recognize your worth even when others don't acknowledge it. It's standing in front of the mirror and declaring, I am fearfully and wonderfully made, even when you feel overlooked. It's choosing to celebrate small victories, even if no one else notices them. It's refusing to wait for someone else's permission to step into your calling. When you validate yourself, you stop living for applause and start living from assurance. But self-validation alone isn't enough. You need divine validation, because there are moments when even your own voice will waver. There are days when your confidence feels shaky, when your affirmations don't feel strong enough, when doubt creeps in louder than your declarations. In those moments, divine validation anchors you. God's word reminds you who you are. His spirit whispers, you are chosen, you are loved, you are set apart. That's the kind of validation that cannot be shaken, because it doesn't come from man and it doesn't come from your emotions. It comes from eternity. Think about Jesus at the Jordan River. Before he performed a single miracle, before he healed the sick or raised the dead, the heavens opened and the Father declared, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." That was divine validation. Jesus' worth wasn't tied to what he had done, but to who he was in the eyes of his Father. And the same is true for you. Your value isn't proven by achievements, friendships, or applause. It's rooted in who God says you are. A woman with no friend may feel invisible to the world, but she is fully seen by God. She may feel unheard by people, but she is constantly affirmed by heaven. Every day she chooses to rise again, every tear she wipes from her face, every dream she refuses to let die, he sees it all. And when you embrace his validation, you stop chasing temporary approval. You stop shrinking to fit in. You stop performing for applause. Instead, you live with confidence, knowing that the creator of the universe has already stamped you with his approval. This shift changes everything. When you no longer crave applause, you stop settling for environments that don't honor your worth. When you are validated by God, you stop begging to be included in rooms you've outgrown. When you affirm yourself, you stop waiting for others to recognize your greatness before you walk in it. You carry yourself differently, not with arrogance, but with quiet authority, because you know you're approved by the one whose opinion outweighs them all. Cultivating self-validation and divine validation is what transforms isolation into empowerment. It's what makes a woman with no friend unshakable, because applause may fade, but God's affirmation remains. And once you learn to stand on that truth, no amount of silence, no absence of claps, no loss of company can strip away your worth. There's something powerful about turning pain into purpose. When a woman finds herself in a season with no friends, the loneliness cuts deep. She scrolls past pictures of gatherings she wasn't invited to, birthdays she wasn't celebrated in, conversations she wasn't included in, and every image feels like another reminder that she's standing alone. That pain is real. It's not just about being left out, it's about feeling unseen, unchosen, and unloved. But here's the beauty of God. He doesn't let pain go to waste. Every tear, every ache, every moment of isolation can be transformed into testimony, into wisdom, into strength that not only sustains you but blesses others. Pain becomes purpose when you refuse to let it harden your heart. It's easy to grow bitter, to wall off your emotions, to decide that because you were overlooked, you'll never trust anyone again. But God calls you higher. He invites you to let pain soften you, not break you. To let loneliness teach you compassion, not resentment. To allow rejection to shape your discernment, not your bitterness. Because the truth is, what you've been through can become the very thing that empowers someone else. Think of the woman who has no friends but still shows up with grace. She may walk into church alone, but her worship is powerful. She may go home to an empty phone, but her prayer life is full. She may not have a circle to affirm her, but she has the strength to affirm others. Why? Because her pain taught her how to pour out what she once longed for. She knows what it feels like to be unseen, so she makes sure others feel noticed. She knows what it's like to walk in silence, so she speaks life into those around her. Her testimony becomes the evidence that loneliness is not the end. It's the soil where purpose grows. Even in scripture, we see this principle. Joseph endured betrayal, slavery, and prison. His pain was deep and unjust. But when purpose finally revealed itself, he said to his brothers, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." That's the transformation of pain into purpose. What was once designed to destroy you becomes the very platform for your destiny. The same is true for a woman with no friend. The isolation that once felt like punishment can become preparation. The solitude that once felt like abandonment can become empowerment. When you embrace this shift, your perspective changes. You stop asking, "Why me?" and start declaring, "Because of me, someone else will heal." You stop seeing your loneliness as wasted time and start seeing it as training ground. You realize that your pain gave you language, empathy, and strength that you could never have developed otherwise. And now you carry a testimony that someone else needs to hear. Turning pain into purpose doesn't mean denying the hurt. It means surrendering it to God and allowing Him to rewrite the story. It means trusting that your tears were not wasted, that your empty seasons were not meaningless, that your silent nights were not ignored. It means realizing that your life is a canvas and even the darkest shades are part of the masterpiece God is painting. A woman with no friend carries a story that is not just hers, it's a lesson for all. She teaches us that strength isn't found in numbers, but in endurance. She reminds us that loneliness can break you down, but it can also build you up if you let God shape it. She shows us that isolation can birth innovation, that silence can create clarity, that pain can release purpose. So when others look at her story, they don't just see loneliness, they see resilience. They don't just see what she lost, they see what she gained. They don't just see her pain, they see her purpose. And that is the untold story that turns a season of no friends into a legacy of strength.